Today's training is Navigating Communication and Conflict in the Workplace, and it's presented by Ronisha Jackson. Next slide, please. So Ronisha is a off, um, founder and chief leadership officer of Evolve Training Coaching Facilitation. And she has over a decade of experience working alongside mission-driven organizations, partnering with boards, executive leaders, and staff. She brings a community-informed, practice-oriented approach to inclusive leadership, and she has a Master of Science with a concentration in nonprofit and association management. So we're really happy to have her here and welcome. And I'm going to go ahead and let you get.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And I am so happy to be here. And I'm also very, very happy to see so many of you here for this topic, navigating conflict and communication in the workplace. Our mission at Evolve is to make sure that nonprofit leaders have the tools that they need to have healthy workspaces. That's what we do. So it brings me great joy to be able to share space with you for the next 2 hours and be in community around this topic of conflict and communication. So my goal today is to create a supportive learning space for you. And so I want to give you permission, even though you don't need it, to care for your needs, throughout our 2 hours today. Participate in ways that support you. So if you need to stretch, step away for a minute, dogs, kids, all of the things in the background, I understand. Please feel free to do so. Take care of yourself as you need to. Just ask that you stay engaged with me in the way that feels best for you, whether it be in the chat or with emojis or lifting your voice, whatever works for you. Just stay engaged so that I know that you're here and that I am supporting you in the best way that I can. I also want to uplift confidentiality of stories. So today we will have 2 breakout rooms, but there will also be opportunities for us to maybe workshop some challenges that you might be going through in your workspace. And so we want to ask that stories stay here. So names of individuals and their experiences stay in this space, but take all of the lessons that you learned during our time together back to your workspaces with you. We really want you to do that, but make sure you just leave stories in this space as confidential. We also want to make space for you to speak from your own experience. Even me, sometimes I tend to generalize, what I'm seeing across a myriad of nonprofit organizations, but the reality is every organization is unique to itself. And so today, we want to speak from our individual experiences and to make space for different perspectives. And then lastly, as already shared, just engage in ways that are supportive to you. And then if you need support to participate, please feel free to let us know. We have a lot of support here on the call today. So Lana, you can private message, or if, at any time you're not hearing me well or something's not working for you, please let us know, because my goal today is just to make sure that you have what you need to be fully engaged in this workshop. All right. So I'd love to learn a little bit more about who's in the room with us today. So if you could, in the chat, just share with us your name, the mission that you help support. So we don't need to know the name of your organization, but what is your mission? What do you help support? Whether you work in finance or fundraising or program support, what is the mission that you are representing, that you work towards every single day? And then, how do you take your coffee? Are you a black coffee drinker? Are you a coffee drinker with milk? Are you a coffee drinker with some type of special creamer? Or do you not drink coffee at all? And I will say I am someone who is not a coffee drinker. I am a tea drinker, but I do take my tea with cream. So if you could, in the chat, just share a little bit about who we have in this space today. I love, 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 especially learning about your missions and the work that you're doing to impact the community. But it's also helpful to know, a little bit about each person that we have in the space today. All right, so I'm starting to see some introductions coming in. So Jamie is saying, yes, I need caffeine to start my day. Give it to me. I'm also seeing that coffee with sugar-free creamer, which is a great thing, less sugar. I'm seeing coffee with creamer and vanilla foam. I am also a fan of foam. So keep sharing with us who we have here. I love to see that there's so many different missions, the elderly population, community advocates, working with children. So I know we have a lot of family and children serving nonprofits in this space today, mental health, all of these different missions. And even knowing that we have such diverse missions here in the space today, we are all here based on one topic, and that is how do we navigate communication and conflict in the workplace. So even though we have very different workplaces, the reality is that conflict shows up in every single workplace, and we all need skills to be able to work through them in a healthy way. And so that is our goal for our time together today. In our workspaces, conflicts are inevitable, and we will talk more about that. Sometimes I start working with organizations and I ask them, what is your goal for our work together? And they say, oh, we want to have a conflict-free workspace. And I say to them, there is no such thing, right? Conflict is going to happen in our workspaces. So that's the first thing that we all have to get more comfortable with, right? Conflict is inevitable and it is going to happen. Conflict-free workspaces is just not something that we should work towards. And once we all get more comfortable with that, then we can start to create healthy cultures that allow us to have healthy ways of dealing with conflict. And so that is our goal today, for you to leave with a clear understanding of patterns that come up, things that you are probably not just experiencing on your own. Others are probably experiencing similar things. You'll also get some practical tools for how to navigate these conversations, not just navigating them, but navigating them in a where you feel confident and you have clarity around that. And then we'll talk through some strategies for building trust, being able to strengthen the way that you collaborate with your teams, and being able to improve your effectiveness, because a lot of times conflict is the barrier to our effectiveness, to our abilities to really be able to show up and do our work in an effective way. And so that's what's most important during our time together today. All right. So, why does navigating conflict and communication matter? Why is this important? I think you all probably have experienced the importance of this already. That's why you are here. But in mission-driven organizations, especially, we are all there with large hearts. No matter, what the heart is for, our hearts are very large. That's why we chose to do this type of work. Unresolved conflict doesn't just affect our employees, right? It also affects our missions and our abilities to be able to deliver on this work. So this natural thing of conflict is something that we have to get more comfortable engaging with and dealing with. And so recognizing that trust and workplace relationships are such an important part of really being able to deliver on our mission is why we need to have these skills to be able to work through. And so addressing conflict in a constructive way can really help you to strengthen relationships, improve outcomes, not only internally, but externally, and create a healthy workspace where people feel glad and happy to come to work. Even in virtual workspaces, we see conflict, showing up. And if we don't have tools and ways to work through it, they continue to be a challenge. So that is why, this type of work is really important and it really matters. So before we get into our curriculum today, it's really important that we ground on shared language, because sometimes we use the words conflict and we use the words communication in different ways, right? And so it can create confusion, it can create tension. A lot of times people will avoid having conversations when the word conflict comes up. So we have to really ground in shared language of what we mean when we're using those words, so that we can move forward in practice and really being able to implement some of the things that we talk about today. So I want to start by defining communication for you. Communication today in this context is really the process of creating shared understanding. So it includes not only the things we say, but how we say those things, the things that we leave unsaid. So even the things that we don't say are a part of communication, and how other people interpret our messages. So that's a part of it as well. It's not just about the fact that I sent the email, right? It's also about the tone of the email, the timing of the email, when it was sent. All of those things communicate something differently. And when we are communicating, face to face or virtually, even our body language will help to communicate things. So we'll talk more about that today as well. But the key takeaway here is that communication is very effective when there is understanding and not simply when you are just delivering what it is that you want to say. So we're going to talk about how we can communicate in a way that ensures that other individuals or the individuals that we are communicating to have a true understanding of what it is that we are trying to say. So I have a question for you all. If you were to take a trip to the beach today and you were to see this sign, what would it communicate to you? Is anyone willing to come off mute and kind of share what would this communicate to them if they saw this sign?
I like to say, go at your own risk.
Okay.
That's
That
what
was
I see.
Annette. Go at your own risk. Okay.
Yeah.
There was someone else.
I was just gonna say the same, but also if I choose to go in the water, that's on me.
Yes. Yes, it's on you. Okay. I see Jessica says in the chat, you're on your own swimming there. Um, there's no one to help you. You really need to be extra careful. Sylvia is saying, do not get in this water if you cannot swim. Swim at your own risk. You're on your own. Don't go in the water. I see Heather saying, I need to watch my kids extra closely. So there are some people who are saying, when I see this sign, I am not going into the water at all, right? I'm just not going to do it. This sign is there. It's dangerous. I am not going. There are other people who say, you know what? I see this sign and I'm still going to go out there, right? I may consider how far I go. I may think about, how far I let my kids go out. I might just stay in the sand. I might just enjoy the vibes on the beach. And then there are other people who are like, once I see this sign, I'm getting in my car, I'm turning around, and I'm not going to go to the beach at all. So the reality is this sign is here and it's clear that there's danger and that there's no lifeguard on duty. But for each of us, it means something different, right? If I'm a really strong swimmer, maybe I surf, I'm going to walk past the sign like nothing. I'm going to do my own probably assessment of if I can surf today or if it's okay for me to go into the water. That sign really doesn't mean anything to me. But if I'm someone who's out with my family, I'm out with my children and they're not strong swimmers, this sign is communicating something different to me. It is having me to do a completely different action, right, based on reading this. And it's the same with the way that we communicate in our workspaces. So sometimes we communicate something in this blanket email and we say, okay, we're done. I've communicated it. It's cool. And we later find out that everyone didn't take the email the same way, right? Or everyone didn't get the same communication. Or sometimes not everyone even read the email, right? So we have to consider that it is very easy for us to say things plainly and simply and to feel like we've communicated things very well. But what we have communicated is also up to interpretation from others if there is not an opportunity for them to actually learn a little bit more or to really be able to engage with you around what it is that you were trying to say. Miguel, I see your hand.
Yeah, and maybe this sign is also a great exercise for to be perfectly candid as someone that looks at that sign and I can see where everyone else is thinking that. One thing I always am curious is when is it appropriate to like look a little deeper versus like we're overthinking and making over what is something that's clearly said? Because that's also I find a big source conflict is when it's like, no, they just meant this. It doesn't mean beyond this point. So where does the line between, thinking critically versus like you're overthinking and making too much of it begin? Because I know
Yes.
there's nuance between the two.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And I would say, Miguel, that is a great point that you brought up, right? Sometimes we may tend to oversimplify things, or there may be some communications where we do need to dig deeper, all of these things. I would say, in thinking about communication and conflict in the workplace, I think that it starts with whoever's delivering the message, right? Yes, as receivers of a message, we also have a responsibility to ask for clarity when we need it, to think about when we might be oversimplifying a message or when there might be a need or desire to engage on a different level. But I think that whoever's delivering the message also has a really strong responsibility to make sure that there is opportunity for that level of engagement. So, for example, if I send out an email about something that's affecting everyone in the workplace, I should consider that just the email is probably not going to be sufficient for everyone. Maybe I need to make an opportunity for people to come and ask questions. Maybe after the email, I may schedule a Q&A or an opportunity for further discussion or further clarification around it. So I agree with you that there is that nuance. And also, I think a lot of the responsibility, not all of it, needs to begin with the individual who's delivering the messaging. Okay. All right. So, yes, and I also see Joanne says here, what does the danger mean? Is it sharks? That is a great question, right? We see danger, and so what's danger for one person may not be danger for someone else. What exactly does this mean? And so the sign is very ambiguous, and a lot of times so is our communication, right? We know in our minds what we're trying to communicate, but we don't always communicate it in a way that will allow other people to fully understand the extent of what's going on. So I think it's important to know in this case too, what amount of danger is there? Is there some type of bacteria in the water that is dangerous that we should be aware of? Is it sharks? Is it, the waves? All of those things really do make a difference. And so this opens the door to some of the things that we're going to discuss around communication today. Right. And then defining conflict. So conflict is this word that is just so hard for people to sometimes engage with. But conflict is something that occurs when differences create tension between individuals or groups. Doesn't mean that the tension has to end in a knockout, drag out situation, but there's some type of tension between at least two people. And even individuals can have internal conflict, right? But in the workplace, what we see most often is conflict between at least two people because there is some type of difference in either their perspective or their priorities or their values. But it is a normal part of working with other people's. Conflict in itself is not inherently good or bad. It can help you be more productive based on how it is addressed. But it really is important for us to help to neutralize the word conflict. So many people avoid addressing things that really need to be addressed because the word conflict appears to be such a negative word, and it's not. It is very, very neutral. So conflict is not necessarily the problem. The problem comes in how we respond to conflict. So the issue starts to come up when we are not able to respond in ways that are effective or that helps us to come to some type of solution or some type of agreement. And so that's when conflict becomes an issue. Most of the time, conflict becomes a challenge when we don't address it at all, right? And so that's the biggest takeaway that I want you to take from this is that ignoring conflict is probably one of the worst things that you could possibly do. And so today, really understanding that the word and the tension that comes with conflict is not necessarily the issue. It's more so what happens after the conflict, and it really determines the outcome of that tension. Are there any thoughts or questions before we move forward? Awesome. So now I'm going to ask you all to use your emojis at the bottom to help me learn a little bit more about you. And so the first one is your preference. What do you prefer? Do you prefer Zoom? If so, give me a heart emoji. Or do you prefer Google Meets? If you prefer Google Meets, give me a thumbs up. So I see a lot of Zoom here, a couple of Google Meets. Zoom's definitely winning, but I do see a couple of Google Meets coming up. Okay, more Google Meets. So this is a preference, right? Some people have really specific reasons why they prefer one over the other. But for many people, it is just a preference, right? Like I prefer the interface of Zoom, or I prefer some of the things that some of the features in Google Meets. I see Lou is saying avoiding anything Google like the plague. So some of it might be, branding or, the company itself, but there is a preference here, right? There is one over the other. How about this one? Give me a heart if you prefer to work in the office, or a thumbs up if you prefer to work from home. Okay. Okay, it's like 50-50 this time around. Lots of thumbs up. Anyone willing to share why they chose one over the other? Why they prefer one over the other?
Hi, good morning, everybody. I like to work from the office because it helps me compartmentalize
Mhm.
and it kind of keeps me focused. If I'm at home, I'm already a person that wants to do like five things at once when I'm home. So if I'm working at home, I might start with the laundry and then I will not work entirely. Yeah.
Yes, lots of multitasking. Work from home. Miguel,
Yeah, I'm gonna keep it a buck honest. I like working from home because I need to save on gas.
that's a
Because
good
these
reason.
prices be scandalous.
Yes, that is a very good reason, especially right now. And I see Donna saying more productive at work. Derek is saying, sorry, Derek, I lost you. Office a day or two at home. So a little bit of both. I see Edward, I love this. Home is for living. And I completely agree with that, although I do work from home. So I like that. It's like, I have this value and it says that home is for living. And so I'm always going to choose to work from work. Depriest, did I say that correctly?
Yes, good morning. I like both, but I also like to work in the office because I feel like when I work from home, I work more than I'm supposed to because I'm already at home and I'm comfortable. So I'm okay
Mhm.
with working extra time.
Yes. Yes, I agree with that. That happens to me as well, where it's like you get very comfortable with logging on at 7:30 to do something because it's part of what you do now. This is a place where you also work. Okay. All right. And then the last one. Do you prefer email or do you prefer phone calls? So give me a heart if you prefer emails and give me a thumbs up if you prefer phone calls. Okay. This is about half and half as well. So I see some thumbs up. I also see a lot of hearts. So phone call person, anyone who selected phone call, willing to share why they prefer phone calls over email.
I think there's less room for like misinterpreting the tone or the intention. It's a little bit more specific. Like I ask my staff whenever they're like scheduling something and they're texting caregivers, I'm like, just call them. Like it would avoid you so much time and ambiguity and you're building that relationship, right? And then maybe you could bill for that. Yeah.
Someone else said that in the chat as well. So I think it depends on the context, right? I see Lori says, I don't live on my computer. Someone else says phone calls most of the time, but text for short info. Someone else says, it depends on the context. And, that's important as well, right? Like, even though you may have a preference, there are times where you have to jump out of your preference and be willing to engage with something else because it makes more sense or it's what's needed for the way that you communicate. So the reality is that here we all are in this space and we're coming with different preferences, right? But no one has said, you know what? People don't agree with me. I hate this Zoom. Bye. I'm logging off, right? Everyone is just like, okay, I prefer this. You prefer that. It's cool, right? So why is it that some differences create tension, right? There are some differences that it's like, okay, you prefer this. I prefer that. It's all good, right? It doesn't create tension. It's everyone's okay with the fact that we have different preferences. And then there are other times where there are different preferences and it really does create a problem. It creates a challenge, especially in the workplace. And so the reality is not all differences are created equal. There are some things that feel like no big deal to all of us or some of us. And then there are other things that can feel really heavy for other people and it can create a conflict. Even down to Zoom or Google Meets, right? When organizations are trying to make a decision or, people are changing interfaces and people are like, I love Google and other people are like, no, I want to do Microsoft, right? It can create tension in some cases and in some cases it does not. And so what we are going to do is take a look at some of the primary reasons why some differences don't cause conflict while others do. That's a really important part of being able to address and handle conflict in the workplace is being able to assess and understand what might be happening. Why is this tension coming up? If you have the ability and the skill to be able to name some of the tension that might be coming up, then you can better assess how to address it and how to handle it. So that's where we are going to start during our time together today. So the first reason that differences create tension is because of relevance. So there are some differences that really touch our core values. Maybe they touch on our professional identity or our beliefs or things that we feel like are best for the people we serve, and it starts to become deeply personal for us. So there are reasons why workplaces will say, we don't discuss politics or we don't discuss this or we don't discuss that, right? Because relevance is different for each person. Things that may happen may not affect Miguel at all, but it may affect me a lot. And because it affects me a lot, it is more relevant for me, and it can be something that causes a lot of tension for me. So we're going to take this first situation. You are in a family serving organization, and the team is discussing whether to discharge a client who has repeatedly missed appointments. And one staff member believes that you have to maintain those clear boundaries and the program expectations so that you can serve everyone fairly. And there's another program team member who believes that you should extend additional support so that you can show compassion for the client and the client's circumstances. In this situation, the disagreement is not just about the attendance policy, right? It's also about the different beliefs regarding what's fair, how you implement accountability, what compassion looks like in your workspace, what service looks like in your workspace, right? So when conflict starts to touch on those deeper values, the conversations can become more emotionally charged and more difficult to navigate. So in this situation, there are two people who see different relevance, in the decision that's being made. There's one person who says, we have a policy, we need to stick to that policy. They keep missing these meetings, and so that's the way forward. And then there's someone else who is saying, what, my core values say to me that we need to extend compassion. We need to give another chance, even though they've missed it. We need to look at their individual circumstances, and we need to take that into consideration and not discharge them from the program. This is a situation where these differences can really create a very large conflict within a workspace because the relevance is different for each person. Are there any thoughts or questions about relevance and how that shows up in conflict? Okay. The next one is impact. Okay, I'm just checking the chat to make sure. Okay. I see Dupree says, I think conflicts comes more when it affects our daily life or our inner values. Yes, that's exactly it. We all come to this work, whatever your mission is, you all come to it with different lived experiences, different personal values. And so, yes, it will, like we said, relevance, your values is what makes something more relevant for you. So that is an important part of understanding that sometimes there's an issue and you're like, I don't understand why this is an issue, right? Like, I don't understand why this person is upset about this. Well, it's because it's not, it could be because it's not relevant for you, but it's super, super relevant for them. And I see defining who is the one who makes the final assessment decision in a specific situation. So that's true, right? If we go back to this situation about relevance, you have two people, they both have different ways of how they would approach it. And a lot of times, especially in family serving or youth serving nonprofits, there is a lot of discretion. And so there's not necessarily someone who can say, this is how we're going to respond to this situation. The idea is that two people will come together and be able to come to some type of mutual understanding about how to move forward. And when the skills are not there to be able to do that, we escalate it up to leadership, and then leadership has to be the one to kind of make someone upset because they choose one way or the other. They don't have the time or the capacity to really be able to, engage both of these individuals in a way and ensure that you can come to a mutual understanding. So that's something we'll also discuss throughout our time together today as well. So impact is another important concept that we need to talk about when it comes to conflict. So impact is differences that affect shared goals, limited resources, or outcomes for the people we serve. And when impact is at stake, it can feel very challenging for people to work through an issue. And so in this situation, there is a team deciding how to allocate these limited emergency assistance funds. So there's one staff member who says the funds should be spread across as many families as possible. So even if we have to give each person a smaller amount, we should try and reach as many people as possible. And then there is another individual who says, you know what, I think we should try to provide deeper support. We might have to serve fewer families, but we'll be able to give deeper support to those who have the greatest challenges right now. And so both of these approaches are rooted in a desire to help, right, and to give people the support that they need. But the tension really arises because the resources are limited and the needs are significant and the decision really impacts the community. So it's not just something that impacts all of us. It's a decision that impacts how many people are going to get served, what our mission looks like externally, what the support looks like. Are people really going to get what they need? And so impact is something that can definitely create tension internally and externally, because again, impact is something that we are all so passionate about. That's why we do this work. And so impact is something you should always, always, always consider when you are considering tension, right? And you're thinking about, where is this tension coming from? Does it have to do with relevance, or does it have to do with impact, or maybe it has to do with both? But impact shows up when something else is also being impacted or addressed based on the decision that we make together. Any questions here? Yes. Okay. And then another one that we often don't talk a lot about is power and equity, right? Power and equity is something that we, sometimes see conflict around, but we don't recognize it as something that actually moves tension to conflict, and it often is. So tension can grow when differences connect around who has power, voice, or influence within an organization. So the example here, there is a frontline staff member, and that person's raising concerns about how a policy affects their families. So a new policy has come out, and it's really impacting the people that we serve. And leadership see the policy as something that's really necessary. Their goal is consistency and accountability, but the staff members see these unintended barriers for clients, right? They have different ways that they're looking at this policy. And so the disagreement is not necessarily about the policy itself. It's also about, how did this policy come into place? Something that's impacting all of the people that we serve, whose knowledge and lived experience were valued in making this policy and putting this policy together. So a lot of organizations, say that they really value and they're moving towards, decision making that is shared. And that's a great concept in theory, right? We love shared decision making, but we also have to think about what that looks like in practice, especially in medium-sized organizations. It may be a lot easier to implement when there's a team of 4 or 5, but if you work in an organization where there's 12 or 15 or 23 people, it is very challenging to implement shared decision making without having very clear boundaries and understanding around what that looks like in practice. So power and equity is also something that can move attention to a conflict. And I'm going to pause here for any thoughts or questions. Okay. So the next one is context. Context. Oh, Miguel, I'm sorry. I just saw your hand go up.
Oh yeah, no, I didn't want to stop you from saying what you want to go.
No,
It
go
can
ahead.
always wait.
No,
Well,
go ahead.
yeah, because I try to help and make sure, I'm not a barging Barney, but
It's okay.
as I oftentimes find that too, sometimes when people bring up points where it's like, maybe because it's where I worked in intense places like in the ER, where they
Mm-hmm.
say like if people are coming too intense, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it may be like you guys are coming in too hot. You need to take a breath and take some distance because we pick up the intensity from our clients and unknowingly, subconsciously, or secondhandly, we carry that with us. So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, that's where self-care comes into play. Because really, when conflict happens, maybe it's like a subtle sign of help. Like my cup would be too full and I'm not knowing that. And maybe that's also could be like a thing of like a supportive coworker letting you know that hey, dude,
Mm-hmm.
it's okay. Just take a break or something like that. And it may be just because they're carrying that hurt that they may not be able to see someone that's being supportive and just see instead of someone that's like um coming off as defensive.
Yes. Yes, I completely understand that. And we will definitely unravel today some of the ways that we as individuals approach conflict in the workplace and even with our clients, right? Like we all have ways that tendencies that show up around conflict. And we will definitely make space to kind of reflect on that today and consider what that looks like and how it either contributes maybe to conflict or helps to maybe resolve conflict in some ways. Great. Edward, I see your hand.
Yes, ma'am. Hello. So probably most of the time I overthink. Um, and I know you mentioned earlier about communication and then what's left unsaid. But when
Hmm.
you pop this one up and in my mind, I automatically see conflict because power and equity, that's a natural conflict for me. Because
Mm-hmm.
in the workplace, there has power to make decisions cannot be equitable for everyone, if that makes sense, right?
Hmm.
So in order for our business to meet the deliverables that we've told the community we're going to deliver,
Mm,
at some point, equity cannot be established, right? To
mm,
your first screen with the family, depending on service, like, okay, you missed three. That is our business model. These are the
mhm,
standards and expectations we have. So then where
mhm,
does equity come in at? Right? Again, so I
mhm.
think this is just a natural conflict that you have right here with the power and equity, because I just don't see them always align together in the
Mhm.
workplace, if that makes any sense at all.
Yes, yes, it makes a lot of sense. And I mean, you are right. You know, your experience as seeing them misaligned is something that I want to affirm, you know, is that it takes a lot of work to be able to really um, align these types of things, and a lot of thought, intentional thought of how we show up and the way that we do our work, especially in mission driven organizations where our responsibility should be to the community that we serve. Yes. Are there any other thoughts or questions here? Anything that's coming up for anyone on the call?
I think that I always try to be mindful of like the power dynamic when it's like a supervisory role and you're trying to give feedback to a staff. And there is like differences there, right? And we can't seem to come to an understanding.
Mhm.
Even though you're like, but that's not what I'm trying to say,
Yes.
or you know, and but I'm trying to
Yes.
be mindful of that. I also try to be mindful of maybe like their area of expertise, right? And kind of humble myself. Like, yes, I may be their supervisor, but they're like twice my age and have
Yes.
so much like a wealth of knowledge under their belt. So it's hard, it's really hard to navigate.
Yes. Yes, it is. And I appreciate you naming that, because that's something, especially for those of you who are in leadership, is that's something that you have to recognize, that even just having the title of director or, executive or whatever the case may be, in leadership, supervisor, comes with its own set of power, right? People are automatically going to, because you have this title, give your words a little bit more weight than they would someone else, right? Like, I want to speak to the director. Whatever the director says, they probably take it a little more. They take it in a little more than they would with a program coordinator, or something like that. There is, even if you don't lead in a way where you leverage power as the way that you lead, you have to recognize as a leader that power is part of what comes with your leadership roles or your title within a workspace. And you should consider that, right? That's something that you should think about and recognize in the way that you show up. Okay. All right. Next is context. So this is really, really important. This is probably one of the biggest elements of attention moving from attention to a conflict is the context, right? For each one of us, even here today in this space, there are different things that feel normal, appropriate, or effective in one situation that feels very different for someone else, right? And that's why diversity is so important, right? Diversity in experience, in lived experience, in train of thought, in education. All of these things are so important because it allows us to bring different context to the work that we do. But the context that we bring to a situation really shapes how we interpret people and decisions and actions. So there could be one decision that comes and you see it from one context and your supervisor sees it from another context, or even your client sees it from a different context, right? So in this situation, a supervisor is encouraging staff to maintain very strong professional boundaries with clients to prevent compassion fatigue and ensure sustainability. I believe that that's something that a lot of people experience in this sector, is that we want to help so much that sometimes we have challenges. We struggle with creating really strong boundaries, right? We know that there's a family in crisis and they text us after hours or whatever the case may be, and we want to text them back. But this supervisor is telling the staff, hey, I don't want you to get burnt out. Please, please, please don't answer your phone after hours. Don't do these things that you shouldn't be doing. You want to hold those boundaries. And so a newer staff member is seeing those boundaries as like impersonal or inconsistent with their approach to relationship building. They want to show up. They want to consistently be there for their clients. They know that a lot of the clients don't have anyone else that they can rely on right now at this point in their life. And so they want to be the one who can do that. And so it's challenging. So neither person is necessarily wrong. Like, right, the supervisor is coming with this lived experience and seeing people go through burnout, because they are doing so much work. And this new person who is new to this work is also feeling like, this is part of how I build relationships. And so neither person is necessarily wrong. There are leading practices and best practices in nonprofit in the way that we do things, but they are interpreting the situation through different experiences, through different levels of training and understanding and professional context. And so in this case, when this situation comes up, the tension is not only about boundaries, but it's also about the context, right, of the situation and what meaning that each person attaches to what good client services looks like, right? For me, good client services looks like being there for clients no matter what. Whereas, for the supervisor, good client services looks like having very strong boundaries and maybe ensuring that clients, have a natural support that can support them when we're not available, right? There are different contexts to this situation. Has anyone experienced this type of tension in their workplace where context has been the big challenge? Well, it comes, yes, I see some thumbs up. Thank you so much, Alexa. I appreciate that. So yes, context is often one of the biggest challenges. And so that's something that we also need to consider and to think about as well. And so the last one is communication. And so this is the one that we're going to spend the most time on today. So communication is how you express things, but also how you receive information. Differences in expression and reception don't create conflict on their own. It's how the ideas are expressed and received that really shapes whether people feel respected and valued and heard in communication. So in this case, there's a team member that's raising concerns about a process that's creating challenges for clients. And the supervisor says, this is just how we've always done it, right? The dreaded nonprofit word. This is how we've always done it, right? The supervisor may intend to explain consistent existing constraints, but the staff member may hear that their perspective is not valued, right? So I'm saying that this is the way we've always done it so that you can just understand that like this is a process and it works for us, right, at this level. But for the staff member, it feels like what they're hearing is that the perspective that they're giving is not valued, it's not being heard. And so in communication, we'll talk today about curiosity. When you replace curiosity with telling or dismissing, conversations are more likely to lead to understanding, problem solving, and trust. So being curious about what people are experiencing, what their understanding was, is an important tool that you can use when it comes to communication. But just knowing that this is often one of the biggest, most important aspects of really being able to address conflict is having healthy ways to be able to communicate about it and around it. And I see Miguel says sometimes it's also a case of intent versus liability. That is true. And Sandra says sometimes we give the context, but there's no empathy for the situation. And that's also very true. And one thing that I will say is I have noticed in my years of working in partnership with nonprofit organizations and working towards having healthy workspaces is that we move very quickly in this sector. There are things that we move very slow on, but there's also things that we tend to move very quickly on. And there's definitely a spirit of wanting to move fast. And to do that often oppresses the ability to be able to provide empathy, to be sympathetic to others, to be more intentional about the way we communicate because we are trying to do things so fast and so rapidly. We have to get these numbers and we have to respond really quickly. And a lot of times the urgency, the sense of urgency is manufactured. Right. There's really no one saying that this has to be done this week, right? But we have been accustomed to believing that this sense of urgency is how we must work together. And when there's that high level of urgency, when there's this sense of urgency, the ability to be intentional and to do things like provide empathy in your communication is very, very hard to do because we're moving so quickly. I also see that Amarpreet, I hope I said that correctly. If I didn't, please correct me. Says the supervisor's perspective is different from the team member's perspective, and that's a major occurrence in this type of situation. Absolutely. So that goes back to context, right? We, in our roles, we all have different context, and there's not always a way to ensure that everyone has the same level of context with decision making. And we will talk about that as well, and how important it is to make sure that there is a level of trust. Because when there's trust, there's not a need to have every single level of context, right? If someone's asking you for context about every decision that you made, there's not a lot of trust there. So, that is another challenge that we'll talk through, is that when you have built a level of trust on your team, even when individuals don't always agree with the situation, or even when they don't always have the context, because there is trust, they trust that you've done your homework, you've done what you need to do, they trust your decision making, there's not a need to always fill in the context, whereas there's more of a need to do that, or people ask for more context on teams where there's not a lot of trust. And I see Teresa saying it is making me think that I need to ask clarifying questions. What am I hearing, understanding, and what are you walking away from in this conversation? Absolutely. So that's one of the tools that we will talk about today, is using curiosity to help navigate conflict, being able to show up and ask the curious questions around, okay, how does that impact you? Or what does that look like for you? Or why is this challenging for you? Is a really good way to approach conflict, rather than just making assumptions right away and running with those assumptions. And we'll talk about a tool later called the ladder of inference, that helps with kind of slowing down that jumping from making meaning of something, assigning meaning to something, and going straight to some type of solution, versus taking time to be curious, ask questions, better understand something, or even come back to a challenge. Again, that sense of urgency in our sector tells us that when a problem comes up, we have to solve it right away. So if my team member comes to me and they say, hey, I'm having this issue, the expectation, often an unspoken expectation, is that I'm supposed to solve the issue right away. And so a lot of times, because we're moving so quickly to solve issues or to make sure that there's a response to something right away, we have not had the opportunity to really think through, to be curious, to get more context, to get better understanding, and be able to fully think through the way to respond. And oftentimes that creates more conflict because we haven't taken time to really cool down or understand or really process what's going on in the situation. Amy says, I got into a habit of over explaining because one difficult employee that questions and challenges everything. And I understand. I see this often, and we often think in those situations where we have employees that can be challenging to communicate with, that over explaining or giving them more context will hopefully solve the problem. But oftentimes that doesn't help. That just actually kind of adds a little fuel, right? To the more context they get, the more questions they have, the more they can kind of, you know, spiral a little bit. I'm going to call it spiral. It may not be spiraling, but sometimes there are people with the more context that I have, the more I can, the more I want to pick through it, the more I want to ask questions. And so again, I don't know the specifics of this situation, Amy, but I think trust building, trying to build trust with this employee may help so that you don't have to over explain everything, right? They trust that there are processes in place and there are ways that decisions are being made that fully reflect your values as a leader, but also the values that your organization has as well. Okay. During our first half of our time together, we really talked through, when a disagreement becomes a conflict, what it usually touches on. What is it that usually moves something from being just, different preferences to actually being like, hey, there's tension here, there's a conflict. And so those things were relevance, impact, context, communication, power, and equity. But I want you to think about a time where you may have had a challenge or a disagreement that became a conflict at work. And then I want you to think about what did it touch on? Was it relevance? Was it impact? Was it context? Was it communication, power, and equity? Or was it something else, right? Or are you still not sure what it was, right? So we're going to do a brief breakout discussion, and I'm going to ask you to be vulnerable and share with your team members, what that disagreement was, how it ended, how it transitioned from a disagreement to a conflict, and then what was it that contributed to the misunderstanding. And hindsight is 2020, so if you're thinking about something that happened previously, what would have helped. But if there's something that you are actually dealing with right now, right, a challenge that you're dealing with, it may be helpful to say, I'm going through this right now and I'm not sure what could help. And there is knowledge, there's lived experience in the room. There will be in whatever breakout room you're in. And so it's possible that those individuals might be able to give you some insight, things that have helped them in the past. What I would love for you to do is there will be 4 of you in each breakout room. And when you come back, just being prepared to share 1 or 2 insights, in the chat about what came up or what insights you took away from the time together with your group. And so what's really important about this breakout, about this activity is 1, being able to name when there's conflict. Again, a lot of times within our organization, we ignore things, but also being able to assess what may be contributing to it not just being differences, but a conflict, right? Is it one of those things that we've already discussed, or is it something else? Or are you still trying to assess what it is? And so that's the most important part of being able to address conflict, is first being able to name that there is a conflict and feeling more comfortable talking about what it is so that you can engage with someone else and hopefully get to some type of resolution. There's not always a mutual, decision that comes out of conflict management, but you do want to, in some ways, try to resolve conflicts with individuals who also want to resolve the conflict as well. So I will share this when you're in your breakout rooms. This will show on the screen, so you'll have all of this information. And again, if you need any help, we are here to help. Just click the help button and we'll get there to help you. Welcome back, everyone. Everyone's slowly coming back from breakout rooms. I just want to thank you so much for engaging in that dialogue with one another. I know we still have 10 seconds left, so individuals are slowly coming back from breakouts. But this is such a critical part of being able to to address conflict, right? Being able to and being willing to name that there is a tension and being willing to talk about it. And so that's why we really spent so much time, in that breakout, because that is a critical skill that's needed to be able to, create healthy work environments. So many times there are tensions and no one's naming them. We're all walking around in our workspaces together, and no one's saying that there is a tension, right? Or that that tension has turned to conflict. And so I would love for you to take a minute in the chat and just share any insights, 1 to 2 insights that you gleaned from being able to have these discussions in your breakout room. And I saw a hand. Who was it? I'm sorry, I missed it. Come back.
It was me. I just wanted to make a comment that when you said to name it, because in our I teach parenting skills, and in our curriculum, that is one thing it's a phrase we say. We say you have to name it to tame it. So we're
Yes.
talking about challenging behaviors with children, but it
Yes.
so coincides with adults
Yes.
with the conflicts. But yeah, you have to name it to tame it, because if we don't name it, nobody knows what we're talking about.
Yes, I love that,
Yeah.
Sean. Thank you so much. I love that team. I love that phrase, name it to tame it. Because yes, if it is really, if your work culture is one that um is very avoidant, it can be challenging, right? To go to work every day and to see that there's conflict or tension happening and no one is willing to name it. Everyone's, passing the hot potato and, oh, the leadership should do it and this person, whatever. And that's okay. I really do understand what it's like to work on a team where that is the culture, right? Where we don't talk about conflict and we haven't developed norms around how you handle conflict. But I hope that this workshop opens the door for many organizations or for you as individuals to go back to your organizations and say, I did this workshop with CalTrin, and one thing that came up for me was, XYZ. We really don't have real norms around conflict in the workplace, or, conflict is something that is inevitable, right? It's going to happen, but we haven't talked about how we handle it in this space together. So again, thank you so much for being willing to engage in that way. And I want to thank everyone who's in the chat sharing their takeaways. Clear communication is very important, helpful to identify which type of conflict it is, building rapport and trust with one another, leading with curiosity, knowing that we all process differently. All of this is so important. So I hope that you will continue to add things in the chat and that you will, as individuals, take some of those things that are in the chat with you and to start thinking about them as well. Miguel.
Yeah, one thing that my group found that a lot of miscommunication also is rooted in ego. So sometimes the best way to avoid conflict is to approach conversations with coworkers with a bit of humility and being a
Yes.
willingness to be coachable because intent may not necessarily be hostile if someone's saying, hey, let me show you how you can do this better. It doesn't mean that
Yes.
you're wrong or what you're doing is bad. It's just that someone's giving you perspective that you may not have been aware of. And it doesn't
Yes.
necessarily mean any lesser on you as a person. It's just an opportunity to grow that skill set.
Yes.
And that's oftentimes for me, I learned that that's a gift because someone could let you keep doing the wrong thing until you get burned, or someone
Yes.
could take you aside to show you a more better way of doing things. So that way you're better for what you're doing. Because at the end, it's our clients that benefit from that. That's why humility and all this stuff we learn isn't just fundamental for caregivers, it's fundamental in any industry,
Yes.
construction, retail, whatever you do.
Yes. Absolutely. I love that so much. Thank you for sharing, Miguel. And I also just want to lift up that we don't want to avoid conflict. Um, we want to be able to not have the negative behaviors that sometimes come with unresolved conflict, right? So what happens when conflict is unresolved? People don't communicate respectfully, or people ignore one another. All of those are symptoms of unresolved conflict. So it's not necessarily we don't want to say that we want to avoid conflict altogether, but what we do want to try to get a handle on is those behaviors that come with when conflict has not been addressed and when it has not been dealt with within the workplace. So that leads us to our next slide, which is that conflict is really something not for you to survive, not for you to be like, I just have to figure out how to manage all of this conflict or endure. It is an invitation for growth. When there is tension between two people, it is an invitation, or three or four or five, it's an invitation for those individuals to grow together, right? And to learn different ways to be able to engage with one another. And sometimes you have to agree that we don't agree on this, but this is how we are going to move forward. Each of us as individuals, we carry patterns and we carry habits that shape how we respond to tension, right? A lot of it happens in childhood, or it happens even in adulthood, right? Where we respond to tension based on our lived experiences. And so growth starts when we notice our role that comes when it comes to conflict. And so what we are going to do is take a minute to go through some conflict tendencies. And I'm going to ask that if you have a pen and paper handy for this section, it would be great. If you don't, if you want to open up the Notes app on your phone, or if you want to open up a Google Doc, whatever the case may be, but a space where you can reflect in writing, because this is something that I do want you to come back to when you have time to come back to it. Reflection is self-reflection is such an important part of being able to engage in healthy conflict. A lot of times we are not able to do that because one party in the conflict is not willing to self-reflect, right? So they don't have the language to even share or talk about what's happening for them because they haven't had the opportunity or taken the time to self-reflect. So we're going to practice that today, and I'm going to review some conflict tendencies. And as I'm reviewing them, I want you to take some time to, write down what comes up for you as you hear these things, right? There are common conflict responses: avoiding, accommodating, competing, compromising, collaborating. And during this time, I want you to consider what responses feel most natural to you. So as I'm presenting them to you, something may spark like, oh, that sounds like me a little bit, or that sounds like me in this certain situation. And then starting to think about when it serves you well and when it might create challenges, right? This is an important part of really being able to engage within our workplaces on a high level with conflict and communication. And so the first conflict tendency that I want to present to you is the avoider. So this is a person who may not verbalize it, but you can tell that they would rather not deal with whatever the challenge is. So whenever that conflict arises, this person tends to maybe delay those difficult conversations. They hope the issue just resolves itself. Sometimes they may minimize attention. So there may be like clear tension in a meeting and they may minimize it and say, it's no big deal, right? But this person really tries to keep the peace by staying out of conflict. And the strengths of someone that approaches conflict this way is that they're usually really calm under pressure. They're thoughtful, they're reflective, and they are a person who just avoids unnecessary drama. However, if your primary tendency is to avoid important issues or challenges, can go unaddressed, and resentment can build over time, from you internally and then also from others. So, as I'm reading this, please just write down anything that is coming up for you around this tendency to avoid. And you may see this come up for you in certain situations, right? Maybe when things happen face to face, or maybe when situations have to do with, personal versus workplace, there's different ones, and none of these are good or bad. They all have their strengths and watch outs. But it is important for you to be able to kind of assess how you address conflict, or how you tend to address it. The next one is the accommodator. So this person is like, relationships matter the most, right? So I'm going to do whatever I can to preserve those relationships. And so this person prioritizes harmony. I love accommodators because they're just so easy to work with, right? They give in because they want to maintain their relationships. They tend to focus on other needs before their own. So they're just like, yes, yes, yes to whatever it is that you need. And usually accommodators are very empathetic, they're very relationship centered, they're very cooperative. But if you are an accommodator, your personal needs probably get overlooked very often. And you are a person who may experience burnout and frustration a little bit more, right? Because you're always accommodating others and you're prioritizing, others' needs and really giving in very easily so that you can maintain those relationships. And again, there's no good and bad here, but we all have a primary tendency when it comes to conflict. There's also the competitor, right? So there's this person who they want to get issues addressed very quickly, right? And they really want to um, take a firm position on something and advocate very strongly on what their perspective is. And they like to move quickly towards decisions, right? So these people are very decisive, they're very confident in their decision making, and they're willing to address things very directly. But what could happen when someone, is this way when it comes to conflict is that they are moving so fast that they are not able to hear other people, right? Other people have not had the opportunity to be heard, which is an important part of effective conflict management. You have to make space for other people to feel like you've heard them, right? That's the biggest challenge with conflict, especially conflict communication, is that we all want to communicate what we're experiencing, but we are not often enough making space to really truly take time to listen to what others are experiencing. And so this can unintentionally, create defensiveness and really lean into that sense of urgency that we talked about earlier. And so, what do you think happens when there are two people who have this competitor tendency and they have a conflict amongst one another? What might that look like?
Question,
Yes,
Renisha. When it says can unintentionally create defensiveness, does that mean defensiveness in the other person or in the competitor or both?
both. Yes, both, because it's moving so quickly, and again, even with internally, right? If you are trying to move fast and you're advocating really strongly for your perspective, and someone else is trying to say, "Hey, wait a minute, we haven't heard this or we haven't heard that," you may get very defensive, like, "Hey, I'm very confident about this decision. I've addressed it directly, right?" And so you feel like you have to defend what it is that you've done because you're moving so quick. Yes,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
I would think it would become a power struggle between the two. And
Mhm.
that's exactly where I think where your curiosity become curious comes into
Mhm.
play.
Yes. Yes. You're so right. When you have two competitors who work together and they are in conflict, they both have really strong, confident positions. And so, because they are usually not taking time to listen and are very firm on what it is that they believe, it can be very hard for the two of them to navigate conflict resolution with one another. Right. And so that's why it's so important for you to understand, not that you have to call yourself a competitor, but for you to understand what your primary tendency is. Right. So for me, this is actually my primary tendency, even as someone who, works in the conflict resolution space, right, where I love to get to the end point very quickly, right? And so knowing this about myself is something that has really helped me be able to slow down, be very intentional about hearing other people, really making sure that I make space to understand what's happening for them and what the impact has been on other individuals, and also not feeling like I have to have a solution right away. right? Knowing that I can take time and I can say, hey, I want to hear what you have to say, and then can I have 3 days, or can I have a week, or can I get back to you on Friday, right, with next steps, so that I really have time to think through it and not move so quickly towards what the decision is. Okay. The next one is the collaborator. So this person is like, let's find a solution that works for everyone, right? Like we want to make sure that everyone is happy, right? And that's great. That's okay. But when conflict arises, people who are collaborators, they really tend to like seek understanding. They want to talk to every single person. They want to explore every single perspective. They're trying to get a win-win situation for everyone. And it's great. It's an inclusive way of leading and approaching conflict. It uplifts curiosity, and this person tends to be a strong relationship builder. However, there are times when, you can't take 3 months to make a decision, right? We can't do 5 surveys and survey everyone to figure out, who's going to be our new lunch vendor, right? There are times when the collaborator has to really consider, when is this a collaborative decision and when it's not, right? And so this person really needs to have a decision matrix to help them understand, even though I like to approach situations this way, there are some situations where it's not completely collaborative. And that's just the nature of the way that our organizations are built, right? So sometimes people who are collaborators may tend to overcomplicate very simple issues, and they may want to engage a little bit more. And there is a healthy balance, right? Nothing wrong with being a collaborator. Love, love, love collaborators, but we have to know when it's appropriate to like lean into this, right? And there are times when we need collaborators, right, to be those who approach conflict that way. And then there are times when this is not the primary way we should move forward. And the last one is the compromiser. So this person's like, let's meet in the middle, right? That's their primary way of handling conflict. So they're looking for practical solutions. They're really focusing on fairness, not necessarily equity, right? They're trying to be fair. And in some situations, we're not looking for fairness, we're looking for equity, right? This person is seeking middle ground. So they're flexible, they're pragmatic, they're solution oriented, but they may settle too quickly, right? Because they're just like, hey, we met in the middle, we're here, let's go. Like, it's cool, it's done. And in some cases, neither party may get what they need to really be able to move forward. So in this situation, when people lead with this type of conflict resolution with compromising, we often see that the conflict comes up again, right? Because it's not really a true compromise. It feels like it is because you drew a line to where the middle was and you said this is it. But the conflict, and it's like, why is this conflict continuing to come up again and again? Well, because we actually settled on something that not everyone really had the opportunity to structure in a way that really ensured that there was a resolution. It was just like, let's draw a line, this is it, and move forward. And you'll see in this situation where individuals lean heavily into this, that compromising can sometimes look like these situations coming up again and you feeling like we resolved it, but really you didn't. You just met in the middle. I see Miguel says, are there situations where things may not work out perfect at the moment, but things need to be fair for everyone? And it's okay for things not to be perfect right now, but we can work on it later. And I would say, absolutely. That leans to what I said earlier of just knowing that, we don't have to come to a solution right away for everything. It's okay for things to not be perfect. But what's not okay is if, people are being harmed in the workplace, psychologically, physically, mentally, that's what's not okay. Right. But if everyone is safe, right, it's okay for you to say, and for you all to decide that, hey, this is a situation that needs a little bit more time. And the reality is sometimes time does help work things out. People have different perspectives after they've slept on it and thought about it, and their feelings have had time to adjust. And so it is definitely okay to work on situations later. Okay. So some reflection questions that I want you to take with you is, based on the reflections from reviewing those tendencies, I want you to consider when differences arise. Do you avoid? Do you engage? Do you invite collaboration? How do your values influence your response, right? So just based on, your personal values as an individual and maybe your leadership or your workplace values, how does it influence the way that you respond to conflict? And then also, what does your approach open up or close off for others? So sometimes the way that we approach conflict doesn't make space for other people to engage, or maybe sometimes it makes too much space. So thinking about how your approach it impacts the people around you in the workplace. And again, I really want to underline that there's no one that's better than the other. We all have tendencies that we bring into the workplace. What's most important is that we know what they are and we know how they impact people around us. That's going to be key to conflict resolution and healthy conflict in the workplace. So we're going to move on to some practical tools and strategies that I want you to take with you. The first one is facts, stories, and feelings. So conflict often gets really crazy because we confuse our facts with interpretations. We look at a situation, we interpret it a certain way, and we say, okay, this is the fact. This is what it is. So your coworker didn't respond to an email. That's a fact. You sent an email, it's 3 days later, there's no response, right? And so when we look at a situation, we often make up a story about what's happening, right? We put meaning behind it. And this is true, this is fact. The ladder of inference is a tool that was developed by organizational behaviors, and they really were able to name how people map and make decisions. And part of that is when something happens, our brains try to assign meaning to it. And so the fact that your coworker didn't respond to your email, the meaning that I may assign to that is that this person doesn't respect me, right? They don't respect me. They don't respect my time. They don't respect what's going on. Or I may assign meaning and say, they're not good at their job. They don't respond to emails, right? There's some story that we're putting behind that fact. And it can lead us to feel different ways. We can feel frustrated. We can feel disrespected. We can feel overwhelmed. We could feel like that person is not a good fit for our team, right? But the reality is we need to think, what are the facts? What story am I telling myself? And what emotions is that story creating? Because that's what we do. It's biological, it's natural for us to create a story, but the story that we create is not always fact, right? We don't know if that person's email got hacked and they haven't been receiving emails. We don't know if their computer is broke, or, we don't know what's happening for this individual. Maybe they're out on PTO and we just didn't know it. So facts, stories, feelings is really an important framework that you should bring into your workspaces to really help yourself to assess situations differently, but also to be able to take time to really reassign and think about the meaning that you're assigning to different behaviors. The next one is the 24-hour rule. So whenever emotions are high in the workplace, I'm going to respectfully ask you to not send the email, not respond immediately, don't escalate the situation. Try to pause for at least 24 hours and think about what outcome you want, what relationships you want to preserve, and what conversation needs to happen. And this is a tool you can use even with families, right? Sometimes families call us, they are in high need, there's a lot going on, and we're the safest person for them to just blow up on, right? And so their emotions are high, and now our emotions are starting to get high, and conflicts can happen and it can look different. So really being able to pause and say, let's come back to this tomorrow. Can I give you a call tomorrow afternoon? Being able to move from reaction to intention is such an important aspect of this. And then the last tool that I want to give you is just healthy conflict in 4 steps. So we have this on the wall. We use this in all of our onboarding documents of like, hey, we know that conflict is going to show up in a workplace. We are a very diverse team. There are lots of different ways, lots of different lived experience that we bring to this work. So how do we handle conflict here? And so this is how we handle conflict. One, we pause and we check ourselves first. What assumptions am I making? We get curious second. So we're asking, can you help me understand your perspective? Can you help me understand the impact? All of those things. So taking time to get curious. We also are ensuring that we're sharing impact. So we're describing the effect. We're not just blaming, you did this for the client, or you did this without my permission, or you didn't get approval for this, right? But we want to describe the effect, right? When you submitted that without my approval, I wasn't in the know about what was getting submitted. And then when a question came to me, I wasn't sure how to answer it, right? That's describing the effect, the impact of the behavior versus blaming, right? Or saying your behavior is this or that, or you are this type of person or that type of person. We don't want to do that, right? That is how you escalate conflict. What you really want to do is talk about the impact of the behavior. And then lastly, you want to explore solutions together. So focus on what will help those individuals to move forward, but also what will help you to move forward, right? Being able to really share your intention. My intention is that we can continue to work together positively. And so what would you need to be able to do that, right? And then being able to share, well, this is what I would need. I would need, stronger communication, or whatever it is that you need. But really being able to explore solutions together is a strong way to build trust and to be able to navigate conflict in collaboration with the individuals on your team or individuals that you supervise, or even with your clients. Right. Are there any thoughts or questions?
Ganesh, I have a question.
Yes, absolutely.
I don't know if you can get into this, but what are some practical strategies when you've got an avoider or an accommodator who is a subordinate who conflicts with a manager who is a competitor and can be
Ooh,
defensive?
yes. Okay. So my question to you, Diane, is do these two individuals, have they named that this is how they approach conflict?
They have not explicitly named it, but
Okay.
I think it's implicitly understood.
Okay. Okay. So a lot of times, especially when there's that power dynamic, right, of, someone who supervises another or whatever it may be, it is very challenging for the party who in essence has less power to feel like they can, engage. So I think the first step is for those two individuals to be able to assess and talk and discuss, with you, or, even with themselves or with someone else, how they approach conflict, and being able to look, because often from the outside, we can look at these two things and we can see clearly what's happening, right? Like for you, it's very clear to see like this person is this way, this person is primarily, this is how they address things. And so you can clearly see where the challenge is, right? Where the bridge is. But what you need is for the two of them to be able to see that, right? It is not an effective idea or an effective way for someone else to always be the middle person between two people who are in conflict. Sometimes you have to do it, right, in a workplace. But what you really want is to move to a space where those two individuals can work in tandem with one another. But it sounds like they don't yet realize their tendencies when it comes to how they deal with conflict. So if there's a way for you to maybe make that part of your culture at work, of just we all assess how we address conflict, and it's something that we can easily talk about and name, and it doesn't feel like I'm being singled out as an individual. I think that might be a good first step to get to a place where those two individuals might be able to at least engage on a high level. They might not be able to by themselves get to conflict resolution right now, but that's something that you want them to be able to work towards. And the first thing is just being able to assess where they are and how they approach conflict as individuals.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if you're going to get to this, but are you going to share strategies for like, um, yeah, these are things that the avoider or accommodator, these are some proactive things that they could do or be mindful of. And in the previous slides, it gave a good profile, but like these
Yes.
are like, hey, avoider, these are
Yes.
things that you can lean into, or hey, competitor, these are things that you might want to lean into.
You know what? That's a really great model. And I wish we had more time, but we do not. However, what I can do is I do have some strategies for each of those, and I will see if the CalTrin team can send it out in your 1 week follow-up email.
Great, thank you.
Yes. Yes. My pleasure. All right. So I do have a resource page that I know that they're going to send out to you all so that you can continue to grow and learn. And I just want to thank you so much for being willing to engage with conflict. It's so, so important. And it was such a pleasure to be in community with you all. All right. So I will kick it back
Yeah,
to.
thank you everyone for joining us today. Please note that the survey is in the chat now. And so please feel free to fill that out. You can click on it and you can exit out of the Zoom. It's okay. It won't take you out of the survey. So feel free to fill that in for us just to give us some feedback. And that's how you get your certificate for the day. Thank you so much for joining us.